If we can talk endlessly about racial disparities, inequality, and politics, then we should be able to talk up honestly about marriage, family structure, and what happens to children when those foundations begin to collapse.
I think parents generally confuse the interests of their family with the interests of their children.
Where did they get the idea that children don't belong to their parents and parents are not responsible for their children?
Karl Marx said that he believed in abolishing the family because he understood that the family stood in the way of young people having complete fealty and loyalty to the state. The bigger issue, and the one I'm most concerned about, is the complete disappearance of marriage. I'm talking about neighborhoods where marriage has become obsolete and fathers become optional.
Once you begin telling, women they don't need husbands and increasingly moving decisions about children away from parents and toward government institutions, you aren't simply changing economic policy, you're changing who has authority in society.
We have to stop demonizing men, stop trivializing men, and acting as if they're absolutely clueless.
Well, he doesn't talk like that anymore. How do we deal with leaders who once seemed willing to confront these problems, but now support movements and ideologies that we believe are pushing Black men and women even further apart?
Uncle Sam is an unfaithful husband and an absent father because he got too many households to take care of. So
good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all as you watch this broadcast. It's time for Pop and Politics. All right, we have a guest who is stepping straight into one of the conversations America keeps trying to avoid. Delano Squires is here to talk about his new book, The Vanishing Black Family: How Welfare and Feminism Made Marriage Optional and Children Vulnerable. All right, Delano is the director of the Richard and Helen DeVos Center for Human Flourishing at the Heritage Foundation, where his work focuses on marriage, fatherhood, family structure, and social outcomes. All right, Delano Squires, welcome to Pop and Politics. How are you? Well, welcome back, I should say, right?
That's right.
I know.
Hey,
Thank you for having me.
Hi, Delano.
Good to see y'all.
Good to see you.
Of course. You know it.
Absolutely. We are excited to talk to you tonight, excited about your book. So we're going to get right into this. But before we really do a deep dive into your book, I want to talk about what's happening politically in America that I don't think a lot of conservatives can afford to dismiss. And your book does touch on this. And what I'm talking about is, for years, socialism was treated like something confined to college campuses, activist organizations, and these far left democratic areas. But democratic socialists are now winning elections and democratic primaries in some of the biggest cities in the country. We got Zoran Mondani. He's now the mayor of New York. We got a couple coming out of Colorado, more coming out of New York as far as council people, Congress people, Michigan, right?
Seattle.
Seattle. So we're watching other Democratic socialist candidates build real electoral momentum around the country. But they're not just talking about government-run grocery stores. The modern Democrat socialism often comes packaged with, socialist feminism, and it raises a much bigger question about the family. So once you begin telling, women they don't need husbands and increasingly moving decisions about children away from parents and toward government institutions, you aren't simply changing economic policy, you're changing who has authority in society. So we want to bring you this clip to just respond to first. This is the Yale law professor Samuel Moyn was discussing the idea of parents getting proxy votes for their children, and listen closely to why he opposes it.
I've gotten in some hot water for proposing we consider overweighting the votes of younger people, or assigning the youngest eligible voters proxy votes for the unrepresented children of our country. So those are edgy.
Why not assign them to those children's parents?
Well, because there's a divergence of interest between parents and children, and I think it's likelier that young people, not people who are raising families, will have the best insight into the interests of children. Whereas if you were awarded 5
I think
proxy
that's
votes,
daft. I think it's absurd to imagine that a 24-year-old recent college graduate has a better assessment of the interests of my own children than I do. I say this with all due respect to 24-year-old recent college graduates, of whom I hope to be the parent of in 9 years or so.
I think parents generally confuse the interests of their family with the interests of their children. And part of our goal, I think, as parents, but also as a society, is trying to make sure that children aren't the hostages of their parents as much as we rely on parents to raise them.
Wow. All right. So this is what I'm asking, Delano. Is the battle over socialism ultimately also a battle over the family?
In many respects, yes, and particularly if one believes that socialism in any of its various forms is just one small step, towards the ultimate goal of Marxism, communism, then you can see, Karl Marx said that he believed in abolishing the family because he understood that the family stood in the way of young people and people in general having complete fealty and loyalty to the state. So when I hear someone like this say that, young adults have a better sense of the interests of a child than that child's parents, it is an absurd proposition. It is which reflects a completely morally and ethically bankrupt worldview that is so anti-human and anti-nature that it's hard to understand how someone like this. Well, actually, it's not. I was going to say it's hard to understand how someone like this could be a professor at Yale. But actually, I generally believe that most of the worst ideas in society start on college campuses. So it's actually not that strange to hear this. But it is interesting. I can tell you at one point, there was some conversations when Heritage put out its recent family policy paper. We at least had some internal deliberations on the issue of proxy voting, but those votes would have gone to the families, right? Parents, moms and dads on behalf of their children, because obviously parents have a better sense of their children's interests and are more invested in their children's well-being than some complete stranger. And the one part, and I wish Ross Douthat would have pushed him on this, I would have asked him, do you think that a random 24-year-old will die for my child? Because I certainly would, right? I live for and would die for my children. And if they can't meet that same threshold, then why on earth should they be given the privilege of representing my child's interest at the ballot box? So, yeah, I'm not surprised because I think in general, much of, today's progressive movement is in opposition to God, to nature and nature's God. So I'm not surprised to hear someone say something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I'm kind of like you, Delano, not surprised, but it's angering, okay? Because essentially that guy, and again, I know that's Ross Douthat of the New York Times, but I think considering that in his position, that's probably the best that he could do, considering, his position at the New York Times and who he is. He's supposed to be the more conservative one at the New York Times. Nevertheless, notwithstanding that this guy's basically advocating that we are supposed to be handmaidens for the government, basically. That's what he's advocating. We often hear it said that it takes a village to raise children. Does it? And if not, why not? Or if so, then what does that village need to look like?
I definitely believe it takes a village to raise a child. That's the upbringing that I had a large extended family. My mom is the youngest of 10 siblings. My dad's the second youngest of 6 siblings. Growing up, I had dozens of first cousins, God siblings. I had my aunt would look after me before my parents got home from work, and before my aunt could get home, it was her next door neighbor or the woman two doors down who was old enough to be my great grandmother at that point. So I understand what people mean when they say it takes a village to raise a child. I'm all about sort of thick connective networks, particularly talking about intergenerational family, again, fictive kin, play cousins, so on and so forth. I think the problem is that when the left co-opted that phrase, they inserted the state and the bureaucracy into that village, and that's where I certainly would disagree. Like, so my idea of a village never involved any elected official, nor did it involve any unelected bureaucrat. So for me, it was always about family, friends, loved ones, people I knew, people who had a vested interest in my well-being, people who would support the values my parents were trying to instill in me. They weren't subverting what my parents were trying to do. They say, okay, if you know you can't watch this TV show at your parents' house, don't come over here and try to run that game, at our house. So that's the village that I grew up in, and I think that's healthy for children, because it takes a lot of time and energy and resources to raise a child, and having people who support the parents in doing that, to me, is what the ideal village looks like. But too often when people use that term, they are, similar to BLM. When BLM rolled out its Black Villages principle, it started by saying we're committed to disrupting the Western prescribed nuclear family structure. So clearly they have something completely different in mind when it comes to villages. And their principle, their guiding principle on the village did not include a single reference to men, husbands, or fathers. So any village that doesn't have men and is only all women and elected officials and unelected bureaucrats is not the type of village that I would trust to raise my child.
Agreed. Listen, I think you have a very good point there about the vested interest, and we're talking about how communities assist in raising children. When we take a listen to what the guy said, what really, really interested me was that he truly thought that 24-year-olds, because they were closer, I'm assuming, in age, would have some kind of kindredship with someone else's child, a minor child. When did the village get dumb? I mean, I feel like there are parts of the village that are somewhere on the spectrum. Where did they get the idea that children don't belong to their parents, and parents are not responsible for their children? We see this playing out in very big numbers across this nation with the teen takeovers and kids going into family style restaurants, hitting each other with chairs and fighting. And the very first thing that come out of their mouths is, where are the parents? Where are the parents?
Yeah.
You can't have it both ways. How do we get them to see the error in their ways?
Well, to answer your question in terms of how we get here, I think it's been a long march to get to this place. But what that professor was saying is basically the worldview that informs much of American public education, right? It's this idea that part of the school's job is to insert itself between the child and the parent. And that's how you end up getting these same 24-year-olds that he wants to have proxy votes for your kids. That's how you get them teaching in classrooms, imposing their political values and moral values onto children. And these are people who not only have no vested interest in my child, they don't even have their own children.
Exactly.
So for them, they're playing with house money. So they can say, look, I can push progressive ideology. I can push activism, right? I can teach little Jamal how to be an activist, even though he won't know how to read a sign or count his paycheck. So for them, it's house money. It's all upside. I get to use people's children in a social experiment to see if I can successfully impart my values into their children. And if it blows up, I'm not the one that's left holding the bag.
Precisely.
So this is the case when it comes to politics, and it's definitely the case when it comes to the gender ideology that's crept into so many schools. Is people saying, "Oh, well, your parents don't really understand you. I understand that you have you feel like you're born in the wrong body, you're trapped in the wrong body. So when you're in school, we can call you by a preferred name or preferred pronouns, and then when you go back to your parents, you can go by your birth name, and you don't have to tell them, and we won't tell them, and this will just be between two of us." And I grew up in an age where when adults try to keep secrets of somebody else's children, they were playing with their own life. And a lot of these people in these various institutions need to have the fear of God put back into them, because the way that they talk about and talk to other people's children is the type of thing that was not tolerated in generations past.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when we're talking about the village and the community, well, part of the village has always been role models,
Mm,
leaders, whether they be family, friends within the community, um, or people that are just out in front of the community. And want to move next to Roland Martin. So I want to play this next clip because I think it raises a difficult question about leadership in the Black community. So in this clip, Roland Martin is speaking very directly about father absence and the
mm,
damage it was doing to Black children and Black families. But then you contrast it to what he says today, where we see him politically and culturally promoting ideas that we believe increasingly embrace radical feminism and put men and women against one another. So I want to know, I want to see what happened. Take a look here. This is clip 3A.
We've laid out this whole issue in terms of the struggles that people actually go through when it comes to not having a father in a home. We talked about what it means when you have a husband who is not handling his business, when it comes to domestic violence, the impact on the wife, the impact on the children, the impact on future relationships. But the most important thing that I think we have to confront is that what we are describing today, 70% of kids being born out of wedlock, fewer African Americans getting married, you have a higher number of Black women who are going to college versus Black men who are in college, and they're saying, who am I going to marry later? All of this is absolutely preventable. But it's not going to start in the White House. It's not going to start in governor's mansions. It's not going to start with the county government or the city council. It's actually going to start exactly where we are. I've often made it clear that if we're going to have a strong America, a strong Black America, it is going to require African Americans all across this country in various states to be strong just where they are. And strong states mean strong cities mean strong neighborhoods mean strong blocks mean strong streets mean strong houses. And that means that somebody in that house has to say, this is how we are going to operate. And what that means is that if you impregnate a child at an early age, you're going to take care of that child. If you don't know what it requires, then you are going to be paired with somebody who can show you the way. But what it also means is that we have to stop demonizing men, stop trivializing men, and acting as if they're absolutely clueless. For me, I appreciate my mother and my father. But let's be clear, there is no relationship that exists between a son and a father. And when you have that image, it carries you forth. We can change all of this if we are serious about it.
You heard what he said. That when he said this is the main issue affecting our community. Well, he doesn't talk like that anymore.
Now, didn't I tell y'all that Roland Martin was coming after us because he was paid to do it? A lot of y'all was out there saying I was trying to be aggressive with the man, and I was just trying to have a conversation about why he was on TV, national TV, calling me dumb and stupid and a fool just because I criticized Kamala's plans. And I told y'all the reason why he was doing this was because he was buck dancing for biscuits. Roly Poly was paid $350,000 from Kamala Harris. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. Roland Martin was only going after people because he was paid to do so. Point has been proven. Enjoy them biscuits, Roly.
So my question is, how do we deal with leaders who once seemed willing to confront these problems, but now support movements and ideologies that we believe are pushing Black men and women even further apart?
Yeah, I posted that clip on X, recently, and I tagged Roland Martin in it and asked if he still believes this.
Oh,
Because to answer your question in terms of how we deal with leaders who have failed to fulfill their obligation to actually lead, I say I'm willing to start with diplomacy. I'm willing to just ask straight up questions and say, hey, do you still believe this? If so, let's talk about it. But I got a ton of tools in my tool belt, and there's pressure, there's shame, there's all types of things that you can do to inspire and encourage someone to speak up on an issue. But this issue of the failure of the Black leadership class is so important that I dedicated an entire chapter in my book to it, because yes, the book talks about the impact of chattel slavery, of welfare expansion, and second wave feminism on the Black family, and each of those did damage to one of the three main aspects of the home. And this is anytime you want societal level change in terms of family structure, you have to attack one of three elements. It's the institution of marriage, it's men or it's women, right? That's the triangle there. But if welfare and feminism were the pathogens that attack the body and attack the home, then the failure of Black leaders to adequately diagnose the symptoms and recommend a cure is a testament to their abdication of their role as cultural physicians. And to some extent, this is a similar lesson that you get from the Tuskegee experiment. A lot of people think the Tuskegee experiment was about doctors prescribing bad medicine. No, in fact, what it was doctors failing to treat people who they know were ill, even though they could have, and allowing the symptoms to get worse and worse and worse, and just observing from the sidelines. So I think leaders like Roland Martin, and I would indict all types of the entire alphabet soup: NAACP, NAN, National Action Network, CBC, BET, National Urban League. These are all institutions that care far more about retaking the White House than they do rebuilding the Black family. And I do think that they need to be held to account.
Absolutely.
Listen, culturally, and Roland Martin has been in the headlines lately. We're just going to leave that over here. We're not going to touch what Roland was in the news for lately. But culturally, he has had a tremendous effect on Black men in America, and it's a very interesting phenomenon to see someone who started out at the point where he saw the value in the Black father. He saw the value in the Black father leading the Black family, to have that sold, bought, paid for, and then sell this bamboozled story to the same very Black men that he talked about. I find it very interesting. It reminds me of, I don't know, maybe a very viral clip that's going around now of an older, as they call him, Unc, squirting cologne into the air. And he grabs the cologne with his hand and applies it to himself. Within 1 hour, that reel went around the world 2 or 3 times, and you saw men squirting and carrying on. If we can do that with an old man slapping cologne on, why can't we have these same so-called Black leaders, same so-called Black celebrities doing small bits to encourage Black men to take their place again in the family? What's the difference? Is it because it comes with a paycheck when you sell out your culture? Because that's exactly what Roland Martin has done. His beliefs have changed in a way that encouraged his paycheck to go higher. So how do we get that same energy of cologne being swiped out of the air into something that's more meaningful to our culture?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think part of it is just, in American culture generally, people want a lot of sizzle and not much steak, right? So everybody is out for the quick dopamine hit. It's likes and clicks and all sorts of attention, and having the type of sustained attention to serious issues is difficult. And I say it's particularly even more difficult in our community because Black leaders typically only ask Black people to exercise agency when it comes to one of three things: boycotting, protesting, and voting. That's it. If what you're selling cannot be tied to one of those three things, and it may not be a direct tie, right? It may be, I don't know. Well, most of them are direct ties. So Jamal Bryant in Atlanta is talking about we're going to do a Target boycott. NAACP, after the Supreme Court decision that involved, the Voting Rights Act, is telling young black male athletes who they typically have no use for until this election day, telling them to boycott schools in the Southeastern Conference and the SEC because those states are trying to strip black people of political power. So this is where we are, and it's unfortunate. And let me say something that some people may not want to hear, but I think there's a temptation even for black conservatives to fall into this trap, to assume that the type of cultural change that we all want to see, whether we're in West Baltimore, whether we're in Southeast DC, whether we're in North Side of Philly, or East Flatbush, Brooklyn, many of us believe that can only come through political change. And I understand that perspective. But if part of what we do is tell black folks, look, voting 60 years for one party has not done us any good. I'm not about to tell people, all right, well, the strategy is good. We just were voting for the wrong party. So let's vote the next 60 years for a different party.
One party. Yeah.
I don't think that's the way change is going to come. And I'm reluctant to compare different, racial ethnic groups because racial categories are broad and imprecise. And you're talking about millions of people with different values, different customs, cultures, so on and so forth. But it's not lost on me that the ethnic group, and again, it's a broad category, that has the highest household incomes, highest rates of marriage, lowest rates of divorce, best education outcomes are Asian Americans. And I would argue they are by far the least politically active and certainly the least culturally represented. So to me, the idea that we are sold that no, everything is about representation, and if you got to see us and affirm us and validate us, I don't think that's what drives real change. And I'm not saying real change is going to happen overnight, but voting for more brown faces in high places to me is not going to get the job done.
So, okay, you said you're talking about political or politics is not really the answer, even when conservatives, may advocate for that to a degree. Okay. Then
Right.
on the other hand, we hear a lot of let's keep it to black folk. We hear a lot of black folk, your Dr. Umars and other types of people who focus on what I call sort of a modern day version of the Black Panther ethos, right?
I'm disappointed in my sister Nikki. You have no business using hip hop music to build yourself in black culture. Very talented sister, very articulate sister, very intelligent sister, tremendous lyricist. Few sisters I could put in front of her in terms of lyrical talent. But how dare you build a comfortable life for you and your beautiful family on black culture and then turn around and use that success to help Donald Trump leverage his military agenda against Black Africa, the Black Caribbean, and Black America. I need her to understand, Art, Sister Nikki, you are being used against the Black Caribbean. You are being used against Black Africa, and you are being used against Black America.
Blacks focus on blacks, helping blacks, community. What is that the answer? I mean, should we just advocate for more blacks to help, not so much help as far as welfare, things like that, but should we just advocate that blacks taking care of blacks to restore our communities and our families?
Well, I would certainly argue, in the way I wrote the book, The Vanishing Black Family, I'm certainly making the argument that if revival is going to happen with respect to the black family, it has to start from within our community. It's not something that can be outsourced, whether to white conservatives or white liberals. So I certainly would take that position. I'm also a person that is for agency, that's for self-sufficiency, that's for freedom of association. I believe people should spend their dollars where they want to. They should associate with who they want to. They should live around who they want to. That's a universal principle for me, right? I'm an agency guy, and I think one of the reasons that some people, particularly on the center left, have issues with me is because they're dependency people. So they're always looking either to bigger government or better white people to provide solutions to drive the Black community forward. That being said, there's a limit to how effective, to your point, Shelley, the Dr. Umar strategy can be. And the reason why is that melanin doesn't have any intrinsic morals, right?
Come
So
on
if you
now.
tell somebody that you adhere to one particular religious tradition, they can infer that you may believe certain things based on that. Or even if you, let's take it out of religion. If you meet somebody and they tell you that they're vegan, you would assume, okay, this person doesn't eat meat, clearly, probably don't even eat ice cream. They don't eat any, they don't use real leather. But but that's because vegan comes with a set of principles and values that are associated with that particular worldview. That doesn't hold when you just says, well, I'm for Black folk, because Black folk believe all different types of things nowadays. And I'm glad you asked this question, because I've been giving this a lot more thought, and I'm going to include it in an essay I've been working on for quite some time. There was a period of time in generations past where the operating system for Black America was broadly Christian and biblical. And the community rested on that operating system. So you would get words, you'd get speeches, you'd get essays, you'd get leadership that promoted public morality as well as private virtue. I would argue sometime between the 1960s and the 1970s, the dominant operating system for Black America was switched from a broadly Christian biblical operating system to a Marxist Leninist revolutionary operating system. And that's important because the first one had as its poles, right, the different ends of the spectrum. It was right and wrong, good and evil, righteous, unrighteous. You could get a sense of where people would end up based on biblical morality, generally speaking. The second one, the poles for the second one are not right and wrong or good and evil. It's oppressor and oppressed. And those categories can be shifted and manipulated in all different types of ways. So and the thing is, you can go from being oppressed to oppressor in the matter of one conversation. So for instance, the same woman who may say that she's oppressed by the patriarchy and that's why she can't get ahead in life and can't get a job and is not getting equal pay and so on and so on and so forth. Then she moves into a conversation with somebody who identifies as transgender. And now that person is saying, I'm oppressed by cisgender women who don't accept me as a woman and want to ban me from sports and so on and so on and so forth. And I would argue that our cultural operating system has rested on sort of revolutionary principles. And I say that because a lot of people idolize and idealize the Black Panthers. But the Black Panthers could not deliver the type of liberation that people thought that they were going to give them. Right? Now, they look great. All Black, slim and trim, got the shotguns, got the berets, you're doing the free breakfast programs, you're knowing your rights, protecting the community from abusive police officers. I get that. But when Elaine Brown took over the Black Panthers, and I write this in my chapter on feminism, prior to her becoming the first chairwoman of the Black Panthers, the Panthers, for instance, said, compared abortion to genocide. They say abortion was like genocide, trying to kill off the Black community. She came in and said, no, abortion is needed for women to have true liberation. So these are people who are selling you revolution and are willing to kill off 1/3 of their future soldiers. So there are many such contradictions from people who come purporting to support a revolutionary mindset, but cannot even get the basic building blocks of a society right. They can't get harmony between men and women. They can't get lifelong partnership between the sexes. They can't get children to be born, to have values imparted that lead to to growth and development and sustainability. So yeah, they look good in a poster, but that operating system, I don't think would ever get us to where we want to be. So no, I don't. I'm not. I'm not advancing a secular Marxist Leninist idea of revolution or racial uplift.
Mhm.
I'm a Christian. I'm a husband and a father in that order before anything else. Now, those identities are not in conflict in any way with my racial or ethnic identity.
Absolutely.
In the same way, they're not in conflict with my American identity. But those identities are the ones that carry with them certain values, principles, morals, obligations, duties, and responsibilities. And to me, until we're ready to reclaim, that type of identity, then we're not really ready to move forward and to have the type of progress that people think that they want to see.
I mean, you just made me think of something that I wanted to ask you about.
Mhm.
So when you brought up the historical information about the woman who took over the Black Panthers, it made me
Mhm.
think about the viral video that's out right now of Alexandria or Ocasio Cortez.
Usually I keep my private life quite private, but I have made the decision to start freezing my eggs.
And a lot of people are saying she put this video out because she plans to run for president. And we see a lot of women in leadership. And I would say, I guess mostly on the left, at least they're the most vocal about it. They present this idea that in order to lead, they have to somehow, I don't know, for lack of a better words, kill off their biological identity to procreate.
You have to surrender their womanhood. Yeah.
Yes, surrender their womanhood. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And we mostly hear this because on the left, because they're very vocal about it. They want to normalize this. But when you really think about it, it probably is something that's universal with women. But maybe more conservative women don't talk about it, don't try to normalize it, don't vocalize it, in public. So what I'm asking is, because you talk about the radical feminization in your book, do you think in general this is the end to women in leadership? And what I'm saying is this idea that these women are trying to give away their womanhood because they believe this is the only way they can really do these jobs.
Yeah.
Is that the end, really? And when I say the end, is that where eventually all of these women end up? Because they're trying. You can't really do this without doing that. Do you understand what I'm asking?
I do. So this this ties directly to my chapter on feminism in the book, in the Vanishing Black Family, right? So if I were to sum up that chapter in one line, it would be this: that second wave feminism, starting in the mid 1960s, deceived women into believing that femininity is weak, masculinity is toxic in men but empowering in women, that marriage is oppressive, the home is a prison, and children are a burden. And I think what we're seeing 60 plus years later is the logical end to that particular worldview. It's the worldview that told women that the height of femininity was to think, speak, and behave like a man, to dress like a man, to have your power pose, like a man, to have sex like a man, and also to think about children or family like a man. Basically, I'm going to defer this for as long as I can. Oh, the guys, George Clooney and, anybody else could have babies when they're 45, 50. Why can't I? Well, because men and women are equal in dignity and worth, but different in form and function. All right. So yes, our bodies fit together like a hand and glove because that's how God designed us. But we're not the same. And I think what you see from and this I would say is a bipartisan critique because it's not just progressives. Because I saw
Right.
several conservatives either congratulating AOC or saying, well, this is something that conservatives who say they're pro-family should support. But I think it comes from a fundamental a misunderstanding, if not outright rejection of human nature as God designed it, right? So what, as I said, I think much of progressivism is a fight against nature and nature's God. So, women have a particular biological clock, right? They have peak years that are a peak fertility that tends to decrease as they get older until the point where, obviously they hit menopause and no longer childbearing years, right? But peak fertility is not 46. So when you see women being encouraged to delay and defer motherhood, and which is different than saying a woman saying, well, I struggle with infertility issues. I wanted to get pregnant. My husband and I wanted to get pregnant. It just didn't happen for us. And we tried to avail ourselves of the, available reproductive technology. That's something of a completely different type than what AOC is pushing, because what she's pushing is like, well, I'm not sure what's going to be in my future. I might want to run for president. I got to freeze my eggs. And to me, that issue is much bigger than just her personal decision. I think it perfectly encapsulates the problems that we have with family formation in a modern, technologically advanced, society that is saturated with social media. One, she's been with her fiance. She's been engaged for 4 years and been with her fiance. I think they had 2 different stints of their relationship. The most recent stint is 11 years, right? So in times past, one, young people weren't living together the ways that they do. Typically, cohabitation and marriage went hand in hand. So at worst, back in the day, an engaged couple might live together. The old folks in church, they shacking up. And it was clear that they weren't using shacking up as something to be, that wasn't a complimentary term, right? There was a certain amount of judgment in that term. But now the modern relationship life cycle is meet, date for a while, move in together much, much earlier in the relationship life cycle than it used to happen, and stay in sort of this
limbo.
Thank you, Chef. This limbo. So the relationship is there. Some move towards marriage. Some have long extended engagements, but you stay in this position for a long time. For some couples, that means purchasing a house together. So in 2022, about 1 in 5 new home purchases were unmarried couples. For some couples, that may also mean having children together. So they're doing all the things that would typically be associated with marriage, other than the actual marriage, right? So I think this, yes, is a logical extension of the second wave feminist movement. And when I think about it, particularly in our community, we have that issue among one subset of women and men. But the bigger issue, and the one I'm most concerned about, is the complete disappearance of marriage. I'm talking about neighborhoods where marriage has become obsolete and fathers have become optional. I know all 3 of y'all care about the state of Maryland and particularly Baltimore. In Baltimore, 83% of Black children are born to unmarried parents. Wow. 83%. So to be a Black child in Baltimore, from Baltimore, multi-generational sort of Baltimorean, to be a Black child in Baltimore, born to and raised by your married biological parents through your 18th birthday, is the exception and not the norm. And that's the thing, that's what motivated me to write The Vanishing Black Family, because I understand that the family structure and marriage culture that was the norm in our community from the end of the Civil War through the end of the Civil Rights Movement, again, is quickly disappearing, and in some neighborhoods has gone completely extinct.
I wanted to just get a couple words in on what you guys were just talking about, AOC and her egg freezing. The White House had a really attractive pushback to that. There's a picture in the Oval Office of Caroline Leavitt, Usha Vance, and Katie Miller, all holding their brand new babies, all happily married women who are saying conservative women do this differently. And I hope it catches on. I hope it did not get anywhere near as much traction as AOC and those frozen eggs. But for some, it was a very powerful image. It was definitely a powerful image. But with that said, my question, Delano, I'm a huge fan of you, as you well know. I'm
I
also
appreciate
a
that.
huge fan of sitcoms, and that started early in life for me. So when you were talking a bit earlier about how the 60s and the 70s, that cultural change came about, one of the perfect examples, and I got this when I was reading part one, Path to Destruction of your book. I think it was like chapter 2, chapter 3, somewhere in there. Good times. You know, good time. Everybody loved good times. This was a story about a Black family, a father and a mother and their children, and their struggle to get on their feet, right? I mean, it was hard times, and they ate a lot of oatmeal, and they had Bologna across the hallway, and Booger would come and fix things, but mostly about that family unit and how they relied on each other and how they worked together to process problems and, quote unquote, got over, right? James is killed off. Now it's a story of a single mother, and the children became incredibly radicalized. If you take a look at Good Times episodes before the removal of James, it was about the family. When you see Good Times episodes after the death of James, it becomes incredibly radicalized. You see JJ talking about power to the people. And what was the daughter's name? Thelma. Thelma is now rebelling against the traditional values that her mother and Walona, who's a single woman, are trying to teach to her. They bring in little Penny, this abandoned child that had been, wickedly abused by this drunk and horrible mother. The whole storyline, the whole thing of this show changed from, look at these Black people making it happen, hook or crook, they're poor, but they love each other and they're building this strong family unit, to look at this single mother and these radicalized children, and power to the people. We're going to fight for what we want. It was really a turning point generationally. If you look for a period of time where this happened, this is it. This is the key marker for that. I also love Black exploitation movies. Claudine, when you talk about replacing Black men with Uncle Sam, Claudine is one of my favorite Black exploitation movies. Diane Carroll, James Earl Jones, when they were young and beautiful. And it was a very poignant story about how Uncle Sam in the welfare state came into a woman's life and busted it up. And she almost didn't escape, because she did everything but run this man off into the woods with all of her children that weren't his kids.
Right.
But here's this man who wants to love her, who wants to give her a family, but Uncle Sam is competing with him. And Uncle Sam has far more money. He has access to health care. He's providing a home. It comes with the nosy social worker, where they have to hide everything they own in order to have a toaster, believe it or not. And she can't have a boyfriend. She can't advance to that next stage. I wish I could say that those things have changed, but it seems like we've doubled down on dumb. I couldn't have been the only one as a kid who saw that and was like, okay, I don't want to live like Claudine. I want my husband up front. I want to front live my life. How can we make that normal when it was portrayed to us as something that was abnormal? Something weird happened.
Yeah, it's I'm glad you raised those examples, because I think media, whether music, film, or television, is a powerful tool for shaping perception, for reflecting reality, and just gives us an insight to where we are as a culture. One of the things, particularly the second example you gave in terms of Claudine, I write about in chapter 2 of the Vanishing Black Family, where I reference a woman named Johnny Tillman. So Johnny Tillman was a welfare rights organizer in the 1970s, and she was the president of the National Welfare Rights Organization when it disbanded in the 1970s. And she wrote an essay for Ms. Magazine, and I want to quote her. It's a very short quote, where she said, and I quote, "Welfare is like a super sexist marriage. You trade in a man for the man, but you can't divorce him if he treats you bad." And I think this is a perfect sort of encapsulation of what it is that you're saying. Now, the thing is, earlier in the chapter, again, if I had to summarize, chapter 2 in one sentence, I would say that welfare displaced men from their rightful role and position as providers in their home.
Mhm.
Now, Uncle Sam made a proposal. If you want this money, cash assistance, public housing, food, so on and so forth, you got to give up the man. But like any proposal, that transaction cannot be completed without an acceptance, right? So sure, I mean, some guys have proposed to multiple women throughout their life, and some women have been proposed to many times.
Mhm.
But you have to have two yeses. And I think what Johnny Tillman was saying is reflective of this idea. And this is where the tension comes in, because Johnny Tillman was trying to get more Black women like herself onto welfare, because in the 1960s, poverty became both feminized and racialized in to the extent that there was attention paid to the disproportionate impact it had on women, who obviously are the ones typically raising children if the family breaks apart, and that it had on Black folk. So in 1959, the Black poverty rate was about 55%. It came down into the 40s, and continued to decline through the 1960s, but it was still significantly higher than the white poverty rate.
Mm-hmm.
So Delano,
So when you,
go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Finish up.
No, I was going to say. So you have a woman who, in one hand, is saying, "I want more Black women like me in low-income neighborhoods, particularly in urban neighborhoods, to get enrolled in welfare so that they can have the support they need for themselves and their children," while also saying that welfare is a super sexist marriage and critiquing the system and the structure, because she understood that in order to get something from Uncle Sam, she had to give something up. And this is something that women across generations have understood, right? Most of the women that I know and personally have had their mother tell them some variation of, "Don't you go accepting no gifts from some man, because if he gives you something, he's gonna want you. He's going to want something."
Mm-hmm.
There it is. So you see that trade being made in real time. And I think that's one of the things that displaced the family formation norms that were dominant within Black America and within Black culture. And that's how you move what used to be on the margins into the mainstream. And it's that mix of the welfare state displacing men and second wave feminists deceiving women that created a completely different family formation norm that itself replicated over the course of generations. Even as the two sort of contributing factors started to dwindle, at least explicitly and on the surface, right? So now you go into certain neighborhoods again, whether you're talking about West Baltimore or Northeast DC, and you'll see, one, nobody's getting married before they're having kids, and two, some women will explicitly tell you that they're not even interested in marriage, because if they did get married, they would lose certain government benefits. And I think that is the lasting legacy of those two cultural shocks to the household.
Wow. Yeah. So, were you gonna say something, KJ?
No, you go ahead.
Okay, so two things. One thing is just a note. I'm glad that you mention and specify second wave feminism. I when I talk about feminism, sometimes I often try to mention that second wave, because second wave and first wave were totally different. And I just think in general, for conservatives, this is again a minor point, okay? No way I'm making this a macro issue. One of the things that we can do is, again, separate these waves of feminism, because to conservatives, or when people hear conservatives, many people think that we think, well, feminism is all bad. Well, there were waves just like to feminism, and the first wave was, was the best wave, if there is such a thing. Number two, now back to your book and some of these topics. Now let's just, and again, I'm not so much playing devil's advocate, but I do want to just make these points. We know that for the Black community in general, men left the homes, left the families. Marriages is definitely, well, it has been on a decline for a number of decades now. However, if we go back to a little bit like the New Deal, this set the stage for big government programs to come in. Okay, then we had the war, we had all these civil rights era things like that, where you mentioned yourself, Black unemployment was significant.
Mhm.
The women and men are not getting married. We're starting to see that decline in the 60s. But now we have these government programs in place, right? Because the Great Society wanted to tackle poverty. So it's kind of this, which came first, the horse or the cart, or however you say that, the cart or the horse, because at some point, and again, no way, shape am I a big government person, but at some point, from the government's perspective, the government thought it was addressing the poverty, the
Yeah.
unemployment, preparing people for later years, social security programs, things like that. So what, I guess, these social systems, if you will, they all interplay and interact on each other. So my question is basically this: what were people to do?
Well, I mean, if you're going back to the New Deal, right? You're talking about a time where that's when you first get what we know as Social Security. I think the Social Security Act was 1935, somewhere around there. You first get AFDC, aid for, it started
Aid for
as
family with children. Yes,
DC,
right.
right? Aid for dependent children. So sometimes, so the precursor to what we now know as welfare. But one of the things that I say in the book is that those programs were fairly small and limited. So even AFDC at the time, it was, for mothers who had husbands who were deceased or incapacitated to such an extent that they could not work. Once you get to the 1960s, you have a rapid expansion of welfare programs, and I'm trying to find. So let me give you a few numbers, right? So in 1950, total federal expenditures on public aid programs, which was a fraction of welfare spending in general, was about $1 billion. This is 1950. By 1975, it rose to 27 billion, and by 1985, it reached 62 billion. Right, so that is a massive expansion of the welfare state. Similar in terms of public housing. So in 1950, it was about $15 million spent on public housing. By 1985, it was 9 billion. So part of it is these programs just expanded
Loaded.
exponentially. And then it was the requirements, in terms of what you could or could not do, who could or could not be in your home, the type of relationships that you could or could not have. So I understand when people, may say, well, families were poor, they needed help. And I get that. But a lot of times in policymaking, we have to think about what are the unintended consequences. And whenever I think about policy, whether policy change or cultural change, I ask myself, okay, what's the idea? What's the intent? What are the interests? What are the incentives? What's the implementation? And what's the impact? And most people will go from idea, intent, straight to impact, and almost never consider the incentives. And even to this day, I'm our governor, right? Governor Wes Moore. I saw him. He put out a social media post a couple months ago where he was promoting a new partnership that the state of Maryland has with the Bridge Project. Now, the Bridge Project is an initiative to provide funding, it's a guaranteed income program for low-income moms and their children. Right? DC has something similar to this. It's a program called Strong Families, Strong Futures. When the governor put out his tweet, it's about a minute long, and he's talking about all the things that a kid needs to thrive in good schools and a healthy community, da 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 da. No mention of a father. And what was most striking to me is that he was by far the most prominent male in the entire video. He was hugging, he was holding the babies, he was kissing the babies, he was, reading to them. And I'm saying, where are these children's fathers?
That part.
So even though this is not promoted as welfare, it is practicing the same bad incentives as welfare, where the government, in the form of Uncle Sam, right, and it's these Siamese twins. One of them is elected officials, the others unelected bureaucrats, are taking responsibility as the husbands and fathers in hundreds of thousands of homes in this state and millions of homes across the country. And that will never work because Uncle Sam is an unfaithful husband and an absent father because he got too many households to take care of. So even though this is promoted as something good, and this is why a lot of folk, both in our community in general, are always asking, what is the government going to do for me?
Mm-hmm.
And I say, ask that question with caution, because every time somebody gives you something does not mean it's in your best interest. There's a reason when you go to certain, these safaris or whatever, they tell you don't feed the animals, because if you feed an animal that is used to hunting to provide for itself, you will kill its instinct,
Yeah.
and you will end up making it vulnerable to other predators. So it's I get why some people felt, okay, the government needed to do more to help provide, resources for these families, but 60 years in retrospect, which means there are families where you have 3 to 4 generations who have been raised in part on government support. My wife was a social worker in DC. She had one client who came into, child and family services supervision because the woman tragically lost, one of her babies. I think
Mm.
the woman ended up passing away.
Mm.
I think when she passed away, she was 26 or 27 years old. She had at least 5 children. It might have been 6. And that woman had a social worker in her family for at least 3 generations.
Wow.
Right? That's not. I don't ever want to accept that as normal, and I don't care what people say about it.
Mm-mm.
I don't care if they think that I'm cruel. No, I want people to be able to sustain themselves, because if you operate like that, you will always be a client of the state. You're not an agent. You're a client,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're not. You don't have the ability to do for yourself. You're dependent on the largesse and benevolence, oftentimes, of the very people, systems, and structures that you say are oppressing you. And that,
Exactly.
to me, does not make any sense.
So
I
just
have,
on the record, KJ, real quick, very quick, you on the record, Delano, because what you
Mhm.
said, I wrote this question down today. With this conversation we just had, this little interaction, this question: does government intervention, or did government intervention, particularly regarding your book, substantively and substantively change human behavior?
Absolutely, because incentives change. Incentives always change behavior. I worked in the local government for 15 years. One of the first and most important lessons I learned is that wherever a system exists, somebody's going to figure out how to work it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So when you create certain incentives, and people say this all the time, particularly conservatives say, okay, what you subsidize, you get more of, and what you tax, you get less of. So if you tell people, okay, we'll give you $1,000 a month for every child that you have, as long as you're not married, then you're going to get more children born to unmarried parents.
Mm-hmm.
That's just basic human nature. That doesn't mean people are evil. It just means that they're responding to incentives. And this is one of the key aspects of economic theory, is that people respond to incentives. Now, they don't always respond rationally, but they do respond. So yes, I do think government policy can change human behavior, which is why, to the extent that I mention the role that the government can play in a family revival movement, it is always tied towards incentivizing and promoting marriage.
Mm.
It's a marriage before carriage deal. That could come in the form of, ads, advertising, public awareness campaigns. Again, let's just use Baltimore, all across Baltimore. That could come in the form. One of the ideas that I have in the Vanishing Black Family is that is about marriage boot camps
Mm-hmm.
for cohabiting couples who share at least one child, share one biological child. So you have people, men and women, who live together, who likely have their finances commingled,
Mm-hmm.
and who have children. So they've done the things that most married couples do. They just haven't made the step to actually, solidify and solemnize their union. So, and what I write in the book is that there are federal grants
Mm-hmm.
that provide funding for marriage education programs. I cite one of them. It's called Helping Every Area of relationships thrive. Heart. And I float an idea like, okay, somebody who has that grant can run a boot camp. It could be a local church. Call it 6 months or a year. You cover communication, conflict resolution, finances, intimacy and fidelity, all blended families, family expectations, all the important things. But successful completion of the boot camp would mean that when the boot camp is done, you know, Tommy and Lisa are ready to walk down the aisle at a communal wedding at a large venue. It could be M&T Stadium. It could be on the campus of Morgan State. It could be anywhere, but large enough to accommodate all the successful couples and their families. You would pair that couple with a marriage mentor, so that walk with them throughout the ups and downs of life and married life. And the most innovative part, I would argue, is I say the program would need to find, a private foundation, family foundation, private donor, or get community support to the extent where you would provide each successful couple with a marriage gift on their wedding day. That could be $5,000. That could be $10,000. That could be a $20,000 loan that's fully forgiven after 10 years. But the point is that you incentivize couples to get and stay married. And you do this in neighborhoods where a culture of marriage has not existed for decades. I'm talking about the type of neighborhoods where if the local church, First Abyssinian Missionary Baptist Church, if they are doing a ceremonial rite or service for a 24-year-old male on a Saturday afternoon, that it's more likely to be his funeral than his wedding. That's where I want the cultural change to take root. So the book is not even for, how do you get more Yale and Harvard? Like, how do you create the next Barack and Michelle Obama? That's not what I'm shooting for. I want to get the young people in Baltimore, St. Louis, Philadelphia, New York, Washington, D.C., Memphis, Jacksonville, Montgomery, Atlanta, New Orleans, Miami, Charlotte, Oakland, Detroit, Cleveland, the cities that have a critical mass of Black folk, where, again, most of the children are being born to unmarried parents. And how do we recreate a culture of marriage in those neighborhoods so that in future generations, there will be kids who look back and brag on their ancestors and say, we are sitting under a shade tree that our great-great-grandparents planted when nobody thought it could be done. That's what I'm shooting for in this book.
Absolutely.
That's tremendous.
My question was, I believe you have a chapter that's titled something about deceive women with feminism. What was the deception?
So as I said, the deception was this idea that marriage was oppressive. Marriage is a tool of the patriarchy, and that it is inherently oppressive, and which leads to the idea that children are a burden. So one of the reasons that abortion is so prevalent in our community is because of a decline in marriage. Planned Parenthood knows this. Planned Parenthood knows that about 87, basically 90%, close to 90% of women who seek abortions are unmarried. Right? Now, this is why they are willing to, for instance, oppose a bill in the state of Ohio that I believe is being signed into law soon that would teach the success sequence in K through 12 schools at an age appropriate level for students. Success sequence, for anyone who's not familiar, refers to research that shows that when young people finish high school, get a job, get married, then have children in that order, they have a 3% chance of being in poverty by the time they get to their mid-30s. Planned Parenthood doesn't want that because Planned Parenthood benefits when marriage becomes obsolete. So what I argue is that the deception was really intended to push women to dismiss the importance of marriage, to dismiss the beauty of motherhood and children. And even when they desire children, right? So I opened the chapter with Ebony K. Williams, who people know from Real Housewives of New York, from The Griot, from being an internet personality, who many people will know when she said that she wouldn't date a bus driver. When she was asked by Ayanna Van Zant would she date a bus driver, she said, well, if he owns the bus. And they took that as a swipe at working class men. the thing that made me start with her is because when she had a show on the Griot a couple years ago. She did a 3-minute segment where she counseled Black women to stock up on, and these are her words, not mine, on Black sperm. And she used the term Black sperm 6 times in a 3-minute video. And because Ebony K. Williams, with all her resources and her education and her income, basically is at a point in her life where she wants to say yes to the baby and no to the husband.
Mm-hmm.
And she's counseling other Black women to follow in her footsteps. So that is the ultimate impact and legacy of the second wave feminist movement. And if I could, I want to read a short quote from Rebecca Walker, who's the daughter of Alice Walker, the author of The Color Purple, right? So this is from 2008 when Rebecca Walker was about to have her first child. And she talked about, she said that she was raised by a rabid feminist, and that being raised by her mom and I guess influenced by her mom's peers almost made her miss out on the beauty of having a child. So this is what Rebecca Walker, now Rebecca Walker is a noted feminist in her own right, but this is what she said about the family she grew up in. She said, and I quote, "It was drummed into me that being a mother, raising children, and running a home were a form of slavery. Having a career, traveling the world, and being independent were what really mattered according to her being her mom, Alice Walker." So that is the deception. That the family, that marriage, that a husband, that children are a form of slavery, and that being economically independent, being educated, and traveling the world and doing you and doing, putting yourself first at all times is the mark of true liberation. And obviously I'm not arguing that, women can't go to school or have jobs. Like I didn't know any women growing up who were stay-at-home moms or anything like that. But it's the idea. I think the deception, I'll put it this way, I think this will drive the point home. An education and a 6-figure salary makes a man think, now I can take on a wife and children. I'm ready for a family. An education and a 6-figure salary makes women with this particular mindset, the feminist mindset, believe, now I don't need a man. Some of them will say, I don't want children because having children will require me to sacrifice these things. And even for the ones who desire children, they will say, but I don't need a man in order to have the family of my dreams. And this is the asymmetry in terms of the battle between the sexes, is that there's prior to the rise of like manosphere, red pill guys, and even some of them don't even get to this point, but there's no mainstream ideology that makes men, in this case Black men, say, I don't need a woman. I don't know any guys that talk that way. I know plenty of women who say, I don't need a man. Right? So I think that is the ultimate legacy of the second wave feminist movement on American culture in general, because we were talking about AOC a little earlier, but specifically in the Black community, because of the fact that as marriage declined and Black women became heads of household more and more in their families, there was a concerted effort, I would argue, to use their position as heads of household for the benefit of people who, and the way I frame this in the book is I talk about the iron triangle between low-income Black women, elected officials, and unelected bureaucrats, where everybody gets something out of the deal. The women get resources from the government, right? We talked about this, TANF, subsidized housing, WIC, SNAP, so on and so forth. The elected officials get votes that keep them in office and give them political power. And the unelected bureaucrat gets job security from managing the poverty economy. Now, who is left outside of that triangle? It's the Black man.
Now, let me ask you. I want to jump in about the Black man. So we hear constantly that Black women are carrying the family, Black family. But where is the accountability for Black men?
Well, we need more of it. And I will tell you this. I want to say this. I want to say this clearly, so nobody misunderstands what it is that I'm shooting for. The Vanishing Black Family is not my attempt to adjudicate the gender war, because both men and women in our community, from generations past to generations present, bear responsibility for the state of our families and our homes.
Mm-hmm.
The only innocent party in the household is the children.
Mm-hmm.
So this book is actually me playing the role of child advocate.
Mm-hmm.
This is not me trying to put a thumb on the scale and blame women. Am I critical of second wave feminism? Yes, I am. I'm critical of feminism as a political ideology because I argue that as its feature, it sows discord between the sexes.
Mm-hmm.
And any political ideology that sows discord between the sexes, by definition, cannot be pro-marriage or pro-family.
Right.
Right? But this is not me putting a thumb on the scale and telling the brothers, man, I got your back. Yeah, man, it's the women's fault. They won't do such and such. And this is not me playing the role of that some people say, where you just gotta, if you vote like a black woman and black women lead, I'm not doing that either. Right? I'm saying we collectively, right, as a community, all share a part and a responsibility for how things have fallen so far down the hole.
Agreed.
Now, I also argue that the movement to revive marriage and rebuild the black family must be led by black men, and specifically by married Christian black men. Why those, three categories? Because it's best when the messenger and message line up, where people can see you embody the values that you promote. And particularly for Christian men, these are men that I believe and hope will publicly affirm and acknowledge and fight for the blueprint for the family,
Mm-hmm.
while recognizing the architect of the institution of marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now.
Absolutely.
So some guys who say, well, I got somewhat traditional values, they may get a little squishy when the bullets start flying. I'm metaphorically speaking, right? Figuratively speaking. Because there's going to be pushback.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be pushback from several groups, including feminists, LGBT activists, anti-racists, paternalists, big government liberals, abortionists, and also who I call functional atheists. These are the self-professing Christians who practice the values I write about in the book, but don't preach them.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, KJ, to your point, there needs to be accountability on both sides. I write towards the end of the book, I have a section on both what men and women are looking for from the opposite sex with respect to getting married. And, basically, men want a woman who they feel respects them,
Mm-hmm.
that obviously that they're attracted to, and who they can, work with, build a life with. And women want a man who shows them affection, who is honest and faithful, and someone that they can build a life with. But we have both parties blaming the other side. The men are saying that it's late, so we could be real with each other. The men are saying the women are sexually promiscuous, they're aggressive, they constantly talk about how they're in their masculine energy
Mm-hmm.
and their masculine era. They're disrespectful,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't want to get married. They don't want to have kids.
Right.
The women are saying some of these men don't want to take responsibility. They don't want to work. They want to moosh off of women. Even some of the ones who moosh off the baby boys, so to speak, are not faithful.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to be out in the communities, spreading seed everywhere that they go. They got 5 children by 4 different women, and they want to make me, baby mama number 5, and I'm not going for it.
Mm-hmm.
So both parties have a right to complain about the current state of relationship. And what I would argue is that it's clear, and this is, again, reflective of broad sentiment in American culture, that many men and many women do not know how to pick a potential partner to save their life.
Oh yeah.
Preach.
Oh yeah. Yep.
So we are all messing this up.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I'm most concerned about it is not just because of declining marriage rates. It's not because of we're failing to hit replacement rate. It's not because of generational wealth. It's because we are constantly bringing children into chaotic and destructive situations into the home, and then turning around and wondering why our kids have such bad outcomes, whether in the schoolhouse, which eventually leads to the courthouse, and ultimately lands them in the jailhouse.
Well, again, that is The Vanishing Black Family. Delano Squires. Where can people find your book, Delano?
They can, Shelly's holding it up. They can find it on Amazon. I got in my copy right here. They can find it on Amazon. They could probably find it in some of their bookstores. It's a limited release in Barnes and Noble, but ordering on Amazon is probably the easiest way to get it. It's also an audio version that I narrate. So, yes, I would love for people to support. Drop a review. Give me 4 or 5 stars if you think it's worth it. Because this is not just, the book is part social history, part cultural critique, part marriage manifesto. But I also want people, like, it's a well-written book, if you understand.
Very much so.
Right?
Yes,
it's a good read. And I want people to enjoy reading it. It's going to pull on your emotions. We didn't even talk about the impact of slavery on the Black family, but I talk about, the Kraft family and their daring escape from slavery to freedom. We go into media, pop culture, politics, leadership, religion, the failure of the Black church, and the opportunity for redemption for the Black church. So this is not just me complaining about a problem for 10 chapters. This is me saying, this is how we got here. This is what's at stake. This is how we need to move forward. So I hope people enjoy it. And I really hope that this book does for family revival what, for instance, Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, did for changing the conversation around criminal justice reform. And even if we don't agree with all her conclusions, her book was consequential to that debate.
Absolutely.
And I wrote this book to do the same, to be consequential with respect to the debate around restoring marriage and reviving the family.
All right. Final question. Would this be something for high schoolers, as young as high schools, or you say older?
A junior, senior, I think, can handle it. Okay. I have 4 books set aside for my kids. My wife says you got to sign them, and we'll hold on to them
until they're old enough
for a little while, because my kids are ages between 6 and 10, and they know about the book. They're supportive. They go, "Oh, Daddy wrote a Black book." Yes, sure, we'll go with that. But yeah, I think high schoolers can handle it. Certainly a senior in high school.
Yes, senior.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think so too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, again, Delano, thank you for joining us, and
Thank you for having me.
yes, absolutely, for having the courage to tackle a subject so many people would avoid. We don't hear about this enough. So, folks, The Vanishing Black Family, ask some hard questions about marriage, fatherhood, feminism, welfare, and the future of our children, as we just finished talking about. So whether you agree with every argument or not, it's a conversation that our community needs to hear. Every community needs to hear.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.